Hi, I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, a podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today, this episode is actually brought to you by Avemco Insurance Company. Now, Avemco is the official insurance of NAFI. Protect your career with the only insurance created exclusively for NAFI members, where you only pay for coverage for the class of aircraft that you teach in. You'll also automatically qualify for extended protection from lawsuits by former students as long as your policy was active at the time of the accident. Plus, you'll be covered for both instruction and your private flying. The advantages of a NAFI CFI insurance policy from Avemco don't stop there. To learn more or request a quote, please visit www.avemco.com/NAFI today. Now, if you do that, you'll be talking to potentially my guest for this episode. Now, Luke Barnette is the Assistant Underwriting Manager at Avemco. He's been there since 2007 and has done some really great work for helping NAFI members navigate the policy. Luke, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Now, I think as we were discussing prior to the start of this podcast, I think insurance in itself sort of has this mystique. And I think in aviation, it has maybe even a little bit more, where we don't truly understand insurance in general or what goes into it, certainly not what kind of goes on behind the scenes. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So, Luke, tell us a little bit about what it's like to be an underwriting manager. What does that mean? What goes into it?
My main job is really to assess risk and help maintain a loss ratio that's set by the company.
No, I remember when NAFI and Avemco originally started the discussion with the CFI insurance policy, and you guys have been staunch supporters of us since before that happened, certainly ever since. And I mean, it really is a amazing policy for flight instructors. I don't think you can really even find anything comparable out there for what you guys provide. And just I wanted to say thank you on behalf of NAFI and our board of directors and certainly our members for just the amazing support that you guys have provided in helping our members navigate through this process.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate the good partnership we've had with NAFI. I kind of remember one of the first meetings. I wasn't part of that meeting, but I was at the event where the it was coming together and the ideas were starting to form to have this partnership, and it's been a good partnership ever since then. So thank you, and thank you to your
Absolutely.
members.
So again, back to kind of what we wanted to talk about here, just sort of pulling back the curtain to insurance, even into a little bit of the instructor policy itself. Um, you know, if I'm an instructor and God forbid something happens and we damage an airplane and, I had the NAFI CFI insurance plan, what do I do? I'm standing here next to a potentially broken airplane. Let's assume that both myself and the student are okay, thankfully. And now all of a sudden we've got to figure out what happens now. What steps should I start taking immediately to figure this out? Obviously, we'll leave kind of the regulatory FAA stuff about reporting accidents and stuff. We'll leave that out. But what do I do with you guys?
Yeah, as far as the insurance is concerned, you're going to be in a non-owned aircraft, but generally speaking, you still want to make sure you secure that airplane from any further damage. So, that could be if you landed off airport, something like that. We want to make sure that the proper people are contacted. Obviously, if it's a non-owned or rental airplane, you want to contact the FBO. But if it's, an owner's airplane, secure it. If there's people who are injured, of course, render first aid if you can. And at that point, it's contact the insurance company. Our claims department is open 24 hours a day. Now, if it's after hours on the weekend, you're probably going to get a voicemail, but we do have someone that monitors that 24 hours a day, and you would get a return call that would help you set up any kind of, retrieval and kind of let you know what the next steps would be right after an accident.
So is it kind of like, if I get into a car accident, does it sort of follow that same kind of timeline where I take pictures and I submit it into, the insurance company and then they come back? Do you guys send out assessors? Like, how does this all come together?
So typically, obviously we would take pictures from the insured. We do have people right after the accident, they'll snap some pictures with their phone and send that in. Of course, if you don't have any, typically we do send out a claims adjuster that will come out and investigate the claim. They'll gather the aircraft information, the logbooks, make sure the airplane was in the annual, everything was up to date for that, as well as the pilot's logbooks to make sure you're up to date with your annual flight review, things along those lines, to help determine coverage. And then they would also investigate the type of loss, to confirm that it is a covered loss based on the type of accident it is.
Hmm. And so, are there things that an instructor could be doing that would make it not covered? Um, I know it's kind of a weird question, but could we be accidentally doing something that would result in non-coverage?
Well, this policy, first off, is an excess policy. So if there's other policies in place, this is going to be excess or secondary. And it also is considered a liability policy, meaning that the CFI has to be at fault for the loss. So, if you're flying an owner's airplane and he didn't maintain the brake system and, something failed on the brakes, the CFI is not held liable for the maintenance of the airplane. So, therefore, the policy may not pay for anything if there's damage from an accident related to a brake systems issue.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, if you're coming in fast and hot and you have, your student bounce the airplane, that could be construed as, the CFI should have been paying attention and the CFI may be held liable for that type of loss. And so that's
Interesting.
where this policy would ultimately kick in to cover things that, that are accidents, oops, didn't mean to do that. Or, the student did something you just couldn't catch in time, which
And
we see on occasion.
yeah, yeah, okay. So that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's one of those things that maybe people don't always think about is that it's that access policy. It's addition to or kicks in presumably after the other policies have already taken effect. Is that a correct way to say that?
That would be correct. And you kind of deal with two different scenarios here. You have, you know, a NAFI member who's giving instruction to someone who owns the airplane, and then you're giving instruction to someone who's actually renting an airplane. So you kind of have two different policies you have to deal with. If you rent, that's a commercial policy that the NAFI policy would work in conjunction with, and then the owner's policy, which both of those policies are going to have different conditions and terms on how they are going to pay out and what amounts are going to pay out for.
Hmm. And so one of the additional kind of optional things for the policy is the hull coverage, right?
Correct.
So I can get my liability policy and my hull coverage. And forgive us listeners, this isn't necessarily an infomercial on the insurance policy itself, but it's something that you deal with no matter what you're looking at. A hull coverage policy, how does that come into play? Because, they always talk about the fact that, well, you should have hull coverage for the deductible on the insurance policy that you're flying. Is it possible that that hull coverage would also be excess? How does that work?
So it wouldn't be excess if it's on the airplane, because it's that would be considered a primary policy, whether it's an FBO's policy or an individually owned policy. Those would be primary. So if, let's say, you're renting from an FBO, and the FBO has a $10,000 deductible, hopefully the rental agreement's going to say that the renter is responsible basically for the first $10,000 or the $10,000. So that would be the minimum that a renter or a CFI would want to purchase to cover that deductible. And again, like you said, that is an optional coverage. But just like your typical auto coverage, liability is something that we would require that you purchase,
Hmm.
even without haul insurance.
Okay, cool. So that's good to know. And so how does that work when you're working with a private student and it's time for that private student's first solo? Is there any coverage that extends to that? How does it work from a liability standpoint to send your students away on their own to, you know, spread their wings?
Sure, sure. I mean, typically, if they're in the airplane by themselves, most of your state liability laws aren't going to necessarily place blame on that CFI. Now, that being said, that student or the student's estate could certainly turn around and sue the CFI saying, hey, my CFI didn't teach me how to land this airplane. He signed me off for solo. And, I went off and had an accident or something like that. So there's always risk there. So I'll be honest, you're never fully away. You can never fully get away from liability. But the policy is going to protect you for training that you have performed or signed people off for, as long as there's an active policy. So, someone you gave a BFR to 6 months ago, they turn around and decide they're going to sue you or their estate sues you, there's still that liability protection under this NAFI policy.
That's good to know. And that's and really kind of what you said before. I mean, that really kind of, you're protected outside of anything like, gross negligence or dangerous behavior or any of that kind of stuff. If you're doing your due diligence as a CFI, as I know our NAFI members are doing, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you should really not have to worry too much about how the protection extends to you. Would that be a correct way to say it?
Correct. Yeah. And I encourage everybody. We're one of the only companies that I know of that posts the entire policy on our website. You can go out and read the endorsement that gives you your CFI coverage. So you are fully aware, and then you can call us and ask us questions with anything you have on the policy. And our non-owned policy is only 4 pages long, so it's not a lot to get through. So I encourage everybody out there to read your policies and then call us with any questions. Everybody here is really knowledgeable that's going to answer the phone for you.
That's cool. Yeah. And having used insurance in other industries, not aviation, you don't always get that. It's sometimes disheartening when you're in a situation like that and you have a hard time navigating phone trees and trying to get to an actual human being to help you. So knowing that Avemco has that is kind of a nice thing.
Sure.
Every accident or incident is a little bit different, and I acknowledge that. But from start to finish, from hey, I think I just bent a wingtip to kind of going to the end of getting a conclusion to the case. Is there sort of an average timeline of how long it takes to go through and navigate a policy?
Um, I'll be honest, no. It was probably 6 to 9 months before COVID hit. But with the parts availability issue, it has really delayed claims handling. And to be honest, it's not really on the insurance company side. It's really on, being able to find parts and things to fix an airplane to get the airplane back to flight status. It's just delayed. And we're seeing that whether it's a renter's policy or whether it's, an owner's policy, on just the timeline seems to be pushing out further and further.
Hmm. So here's another thought. When I was doing some independent instruction years ago, uh, I was working with a couple owners who had a 152. And one of the things that they made sure to do, and I was a new instructor at the time, so I didn't really know any better. They made sure that the aircraft itself, under their own insurance policy, was covered for flight instruction. And I find that, I learned that lesson early on through them because of that particular experience. But I think a lot of instructors don't realize, and maybe you can help clear this up a little bit, that yes, you want a instructor liability policy, But my understanding is the airplane itself has to be insured for flight instruction. Is that, do you know anything about that?
Well, so for example, if I'm an owner of an airplane and the insurance companies require me to receive 5 hours of dual, typically that policy is going to allow me as the owner to obtain that dual instruction and have coverage while obtaining that dual instruction. Now, that being said, if I own the airplane and I want to let you, John, as the CFI, instruct other people in it, that's where you might need to start considering a commercial policy, depending on what your intent is, how many people you're instructing, things along those lines. So there is concern there, but it's not really a concern if you're just the sole owner of the airplane getting instruction. Most of your policies are going to cover that. Now, that being said, some of your insurance companies have specific requirements for the CFI to give you that dual instruction. Avemco generally says, the CFI has to be current in make and model. And we're really looking, for 3 takeoffs and landings in the last 90 days in that particular, Bonanza or 172 or whatever aircraft you're giving instruction in.
Is there a difference between getting instruction because the insurance company wants you to have the like first 15 hours in the airplane or whatever, versus buying an airplane that you're not even rated for? Let's say you're not even a private pilot and you go buy a 172 and you hire a flight instructor to then get you your private pilot. Is there a difference from an insurance company's eyes of, okay, we're just going to get you comfortable in the airplane versus we're going to do your entire training in the airplane?
So there's certainly underwriting guidelines. We don't put students in retractable gear aircraft. But that being said, and rates are going to be different depending, if you're a private pilot transitioning into a retract, that's going to be different than, a student pilot rate, even in a 172.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, generally speaking, it's just going to be based on the training and the training, the hour requirements for the training. But we don't look at it any differently.
Okay. That's also good to know. It's funny because I think a lot of pilots don't understand these things too, and they go to CFIs and they start asking us like, "Hey, what do I need?" And I always like to joke that CFIs wear a lot of different hats. Sometimes we're therapists, sometimes we're pilots, sometimes we're mechanics, sometimes we're insurance people, and I was never trained for this. This wasn't on my check, right? I have no idea what I'm talking about. And people even call into NAFI, and it's funny because I think sometimes people think that we sell the insurance, and I go, you need to call Avemco because I can't answer these questions.
Sure.
So common misconceptions. I mean, I know we've already touched on a few of these, but when you talk to pilots, what are things that you find most often people misunderstand or maybe even don't understand at all?
I hear if I crash, I won't be alive, which it, you gave kind of a weird look there, and I do too, because the majority of our accidents are actually ground related. Whether that's weather, whether that's taxing, and so there's not a whole lot of death and destruction in those type of losses. Now, of course, we do see those, but that is a common misconception with a lot of, especially new pilots, people that are starting their flight training. Also is that, if you're an independent CFI, that the flight school's insurance policy is going to fully cover you.
Mm.
Now, there are some flight schools that will fully cover their CFIs, but be aware that you're sharing a limit with a company. So you may want to consider a separate non-owned NAFI policy, maybe liability only, that's going to help bridge any kind of gap and give you that extra protection and actually hire you an attorney to defend you and your assets, not relying on a company's attorney to defend you and your assets.
So let's back up here. If I crash, I won't be alive. I I'm trying to sort of analyze this as we talk about it, but that's an interesting statement. Are they trying to say that, well, I don't care because if something happens, I'm going to die anyways, and it won't be my problem? Like, what are they
Yes.
trying to say?
Yeah, and so they don't, if I crash, what am I worried about after I crash because I won't be around. But that may be true in some circumstances, but if you have a wife, a kids, a home, your estate in general, you should be concerned about that because you probably want to protect your estate,
Oh
and
yeah,
this policy would clearly help protect your estate and give you legal defense in any type of lawsuit, even if you are deceased after the accident, it will still defend your estate.
it's not funny, but it's just a weird way to phrase that.
Yeah, it is, and I've heard that from experienced pilots as well. It's interesting.
Huh. So, and kind of the other point that you mentioned regarding flight schools and stuff, you know, coming from that world, especially when I first started out, one of the other statements that you would hear all the time is, "I'm a 20 something freshly graduated college student. I don't have any assets. I don't have anything. If somebody's going to sue me, they can have the moths that come out of my pocket when I, unfurl my
Yeah.
my jeans." You know, I guess there's something to that, but I mean, there's just because you don't have anything doesn't mean people can't sue you, right?
Correct.
So that's not necessarily an accurate statement.
Right. I mean, you are going to want some type of policy. At a minimum, you want the liability policy because every policy of Avemco sells has unlimited legal defense. So we don't cap attorney fees. So we'll stand behind you and defend none of the assets that you don't have in order to make sure we can settle the claim, and therefore they're not garnishing your wages for the next 30 years,
Ooh.
things along those lines. I've never seen that action taken since I've been here, but I would assume in some states that could be a possibility.
So hear that, my young CFI friends. Just because you don't have any money doesn't mean that people can't come after you for money that you haven't even earned yet.
Yeah.
So certainly think about that a little bit. Um, it's that's one of the most common things I think I hear about. I get established pilots who are coming back to flight instruction that are extremely scared about the liability to the assets that they've spent a career developing.
Mhm.
And I think that there's some legitimacy and truth to understanding that. I just don't think enough is spoken on those that are building their career, because you're probably the most at risk because you're the newest in the profession, not just as a flight instructor, but also as a pilot in general. You're still pretty new. And you don't have anything to your name, so you can have an issue to your reputation that is affected by not fighting something, right? If I lose a lawsuit because of liability, am I necessarily going to get another job? Am I going to get another flight instruction job? Am I going to, maybe I want to go to the airlines? Are the airlines going to hire me with a lost lawsuit to my name because of assumed negligence or some other issue there? So I think it's something that people just don't think about.
No, and just like anything you do in life, having a liability policy, even your homeowner's policies extend, outside the home in certain circumstances to give you that liability protection. So it's very important. And if I can push anything to the NAFI members is at least buy a liability policy to protect you and your assets and your family's assets.
So what if I am an independent instructor and I have gone through the process of setting up my own LLC? Okay, so I'm not running it through my own personal finances and stuff like that. I'm running it through the LLC. Does the policy have to be set up differently if I'm doing an LLC, or can it be exactly the same?
So we insure the individual CFI under this product, the NAFI non-owned CFI. We would not put the policy into an LLC name. And ultimately, if you're in the airplane giving instruction, it's not the LLC that was in the airplane when you guys had an accident. It was you as the CFI. I think it does probably give you some legal protection, helps you with tax purposes, things like that. And you would want to talk to an attorney because each state law is going to be a little bit different.
Hmm.
But we are only going to write the policy in that individual CFI's name and
Okay.
only defend that CFI.
But it wouldn't, I guess the other side to that coin would be having your sort of instructional business set up through an LLC isn't going to necessarily interfere with the protections of the insurance policy either, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not going
If
to
you
hurt
want,
yourself by doing it.
no, no, you can have your student, write it to John Niehaus LLC, the payment for your services. That's fine. That's not going to affect the policy.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. That's another question that comes up is just making sure that you're not going to again inadvertently do something that would interfere with the way that it's supposed to work.
Right.
So, my next sort of topic here that I wanted to bring up with you, and this is the one I've been looking forward to, is wildest claims. I think there's certainly we want to be respectful for the individuals. We don't want to say any names or any of that kind of stuff, but I'm sure you guys have seen some things. And through sort of morbid curiosity, I suppose it's always interesting to hear kind of what kind of stuff comes across your guys' desk. Anything that you can talk about?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Alaska always brings us unique claims, from bear attacking, the bush wheels up there, getting into an airplane because someone went fishing the day before and the bear smelled fish, moose attacking airplanes, um, um, ATPs landing gear up. That's always a surprise when you see one of those cross your desk. Um, and this is something related to CFIs. I once got a call from an insured. They rented an airplane. It was him and three other CFIs. So there were four CFIs on the airplane. Our insured was actually in the back seat, but they ran the airplane out of fuel
Oh,
and they had to make an emergency landing. That was pretty shocking to me considering there was four CFIs on board and no one was monitoring the fuel systems. We didn't end up getting a claim out of it because our insured was again in the back seat. But he called us and let us know that hey, there might be something coming along. I might get dragged into a lawsuit because I was in the airplane.
huh.
And we do not look fondly on fuel exhaustion. That is something that if you run an airplane out of fuel, you're probably not going to get insurance again.
Yeah, I know. Former Avemco executive Mike Adams used to do a presentation that was titled "What Kind of Pilot Runs Out of Gas?" He did a
Yeah.
Mentor Live for us with that presentation, and it was great. So I can understand how that would be looked upon unfavorably.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's a bad one. I mean, we had an airplane sitting on a frozen lake on skis, and an earthquake came through, and sunk the airplane,
How?
15 feet out from the shore.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a bad day.
yeah, especially when you're watching it happen. You know what I mean? You're sitting in your kitchen and you see your plane sinking from the earthquake. There's nothing you can do about it.
I can just imagine being on the phone with the insurance company going, yeah, so an earthquake sunk my airplane into a lake. And have you guys, yeah, okay, sure. And the volcano erupt too? Like,
Yeah.
wow.
And there's no exclusion for earthquakes or volcanoes in our policy. So
That's
if those freak accidents happen to occur, you would have coverage under the Avemco policy.
that's incredible. The craziest one that I remember here in Michigan, the university that I used to work for, we have all of these out airports that we would take students to do night cross countries or night takeoffs and landings and stuff like that. And a crew was out doing night landings, and a deer ran across the runway, and everybody was okay. So I'll preface the story with that. But A deer can cause quite a bit of trouble for a Cirrus SR20. That we learned. So it wasn't me, but boy, it was it was gnarly.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few claim pictures of, airplanes impacting deer. We get a few of those every year.
Really. Do
Mhm.
you have, I mean, okay, we'll leave Alaska out of it because we know Alaska has some interesting flying, but is there a region of the country that tends to have more issues than others?
I mean, there's certainly states that have higher losses, but that's a combination of, the amount of pilots or planes that are actually, flying. California, it's a very large aviation state. Florida,
Hmm.
large aviation state. So those are going to tend to have more losses just because of the number of people that are actively flying. Your Midwest states, flyover country, they tend to have less pilots, so they have lower losses, generally speaking. But I would say everybody, we tend to see the same type of losses over and over again, landings and taxi losses, and then the rest of them are weather related, things that are kind of out of control of the insured.
Hmm. I remember, I think one of the other wildest things I've seen, I was at Sun and Fun back in, gosh, this was it 2011 that the tornadoes hit?
I was there. I don't remember the year, but it was intense.
Yeah. Whew. Did you guys have, I remember some of the companies had some pretty long lines at their booth that they weren't expecting. Did you guys have the same issue then with
I mean, we had a lot of people. Everyone came in the hangars when the when the tornado or the straight line winds or whatever it was came through. So we were busy, but we definitely had some claims out of it. But it wasn't as bad as it looked, out on the field.
yeah.
But we definitely picked up a few claims. We always pick up a few claims from Oshkosh. Someone has a prop strike, hits a divot in the ground and have a prop strike or clip a wing, things like that. So all these shows, you do pick up a claim or two. We just hopefully it's not tragic, and
Right.
we've been able to avoid that the last few years.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget watching the just craziness of that year at Sun and Fun. I mean, I remember seeing a C-130 moved on top of a Cessna Caravan.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's ever seen any of those pictures, or if you haven't, I'm sure you can find them. I mean, there was even one where I think it was like three airplanes were just neatly stacked on top of each other. It was incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the air cans being flipped up, when amphibs being flipped over, and I believe there's some YouTube videos out there. It's been a long time since I looked, but I did look, after the event, and there were definitely some out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Luke, as we start to wind this down a little bit, are there other points, whether about this policy or just kind of aviation insurance in general, that you'd like to hit on that we haven't talked to our members about already?
I would just encourage people to make sure you read the product that you're purchasing. That's one of the biggest things I think we get as an underwriter on the phone. People not realizing what they may have purchased, and all the Avemco information is available on our website, or just give us a call. We're happy to discuss anything with you, even if you don't buy a policy from us. We're happy to discuss what our policy is and what we can do for you, and we're really good with especially new pilots. You NAFI CFIs out there, tell your students to give us a call, and we'd be happy to discuss where they need coverage, if there's gapping coverage, and see what we can do to help them.
That's good advice. That's good advice. And I just, as you were talking, there was one last point that I wanted to bring up because I think it's kind of a common misconception, and we sort of touched on it a little bit, but I encourage people to remember that, I've heard stories of, oh, well, the owner has an insurance policy. That's good enough. And my understanding is that the owner's insurance policy is meant to protect the owner. That owner's insurance policy most likely and I can't say, you never know with insurance, but most likely is not meant to be there to protect you, to solve any issues that may happen just because you're on the airplane. Is that an accurate statement?
That would be an accurate statement. With the Avemco owner's policy, the owner has coverage while they're receiving dual instruction because we're requiring that dual instruction. But we're not going to defend that CFI if that owner turns around and sues you, or you get in an accident and you get sued. So that's where that NAFI non-owned CFI policy would kick in to help protect you and those assets after the loss.
And I think that's a really important point because, we understand what it means to have your own, but, remember that the owner's policy is meant purely to make sure that any of their interests are taken care of. You end up, unfortunately, to use this term, you end up being sort of ancillary to the situation. So if you want to protect yourself, then you need to make sure that you go out and find ways of protecting yourself. And this would be a good way to do that.
Right. Yep.
So, Luke, I appreciate you taking the time today. I think we all learned quite a bit about what we need to do to, as we said, protect ourselves. And if they have any questions, feel free to give Avemco a call or go to www.avemco.com/NAFI if you're interested in the plan. Do you know the phone number off the top of your head by any chance?
Yeah, 800-863-3368.
Nice work. Well, Luke, thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.